Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We are reconnecting for our Canby jail study. We'll go ahead and begin with introductions again of those that are in the room. You have me, Randy Netherland, County Commission. You have Sharon Trask, County Commission, Kevin Schutte, County Commission, Kelly Frazier, Facilities, Deidre Gallen, who runs all of our media operations. You have Jeff Knighton with the City of Shelton, Frank Pinter, which is our Support Services Director, and Diane Zorn, which basically is our, she does everything around here for our management and our managers here. So that's who we have on ours. If you don't mind, a quick introduction of yours again, please.
My pleasure, Commissioner. Bill Valdez, partner at K&B Architects. I'm acting as the project manager as well as a justice and corrections expert. I also have Sherry O'Brien, also a partner at K&B Architects and is a lead programmer and designer within our firm. And Brian Belay, who's a staff architect and designer on our justice studio at K&B Architects as well.
Okay, thank you. With that being said, all the players are here, so we'll go ahead and turn over to you and let you take over from this point.
You bet. So thank you very much. Let me move this around. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. So as far as the project agenda of where we're at, we are going to be presenting and talking about some preliminary cost models, as well as some refinements of our options. Would like to definitely get some feedback, if we can, just on where those options actually are. We don't have any graphics yet, but we will also talk a little bit about staffing plan. We were able to meet with Kevin about a week and a half ago, and had great discussion with regard to staffing plan and operations of the different options, as well as kind of comparing back to how the existing jail runs. And essentially what came out of that is, while a much larger facility with either of any of these options, the staffing increase is going to be fairly minimal due to efficiency of design and everything else. So as we refine and develop documentation of what those staffing plans are actually going to be, we'll share those in the week, probably in the next week. But it will be probably maybe adding just a post to the overall current staffing. So that's a good thing. And so we had really good discussions about operations with regard to that. So that will definitely inform ongoing operational costs. We're also starting to take a look at other operational costs, including utilities and the like, which that information will get rolled into the overall kind of bigger discussion with regard to ongoing and operational costs, which some of that will actually come hopefully today as part of some of these preferred options discussions. Moving forward, we'll have, our next scheduled meeting is in July, on July the 19th. At that point, we plan to be able to have a final cost model discussion, more focused on the preferred option, so we can spend more time and more resources in finalizing that number even more, as well as, if we're ready to at that point, if decisions have been made, that we'll have a draft report prepared to start that type of discussions. If we need to have additional meetings, or is there more discussions that need to occur, that draft report will be more kind of in process and might be delayed slightly. That being said, on a little bit of a different subject, there was some questions that were asked just about potential opportunities for funding. And so we did reach out per direction, per some other discussions, to a couple of other agencies and firms that provide privatized financing for public institutions and facilities using tax-exempt financing as a tool. We made initial contacts there with the firms. We provided some of that information to Frank Pinter, and based off of, I think, hopefully some follow-up. If the county is comfortable with that, we'll arrange some other sidebar conversations to be able to talk with them about the pros and the cons and the benefits and the differences of doing general obligation financing versus a tax exempt privatized funding model for these type of facilities. So we'll kind of see where that goes, but that information has been shared with the county. And we can kind of arrange for a time for those conversations to actually occur down the road. So that's kind of where that stands as far as what's occurred since our last meeting a couple of weeks ago. And so with that, what we wanted to be able to talk about a little bit more today is kind of go through the refinement of some of the site options, talk a little bit more kind of detail about that. We do, as you kind of see here, is we've been able to get some additional information with regard to site utilities based off conversations with the city and doing some additional research. So KPFF has been doing that as our consultant, our civil engineering consultant. And we've tried to kind of capture this all here. Brian, would you be able to, or would you be comfortable talking a little bit more about this information as well as kind of some of the kind of the expectations and outcomes that kind of came between the discussions with KPFF and
Sure.
development? Yep.
Yeah. So we'll start with alternate site 1. That's the US 101 and Washington 102 intersection. So basically, KPFF had a couple outstanding calls into the city and the county. They confirmed that there was the sanitary sewer that ran along Washington 102. So that's about 1,600 feet from our site that we chose, or that we talked about, that northwestmost site of those 6 greenfield sites. It was confirmed that that sewer was about 11 feet deep. So that means that we can go with the gravity flow, which is a lot more, we can save the costs on doing any pumping from our site. So that's good there. For the water main connection, there is a confirmed water main that ran across Washington 102. The Public Works site was not connected to that due to some funding issues at the time, but it was installed because of the Washington Patrol addition along that road. But there's a 4,000 gallon tank that had that was connected to a 12-inch main. So we're going to do some more investigation on the reasons why it wasn't connected to the 16-inch, and then pressure and flow needs to be confirmed as well, just to make sure that we don't need any additional pumps from that to the new site. For alternate site 2, there's a lot of discussion about connecting, at all to any public utilities, and that was really out of the question, just the distance alone. So really, with site 2, septic field, drain field is really the only option. And as mentioned before, this wasn't, at least we don't know of any successful correctional facilities that have any septic tank, septic field type installations for a correctional facility. But just in theory, if we were to install one, it would take up to 2.5 acres. And, it's very risky. If anything went wrong with the system, you would have continual maintenance and just, shut down of the entire plant, which is definitely not something that you even want to think about in a facility like this. And it was ultimately KPFF's their recommendation that this site was not the best, and just looking forward into the costs and construction and maintenance of it, this site was not, recommended to continue with even exploring, just due to these, just due to the septic site. And then just a couple of confirmations for existing site, Mason County Jail, the existing site. They do have, kind of put this in the wrong order, but that existing storm drainage system is only 4 feet deep, which means that any additional stormwater detention vault will need some pumps to continually drain that. And then the vault itself would be about 40,000 cubic feet, and any green roofs would reduce this total size of the vault, but not by that much, considering the amount of roof that we have compared to how much we actually need to store. So we were looking at options of putting it under the building, or any adjacent lots that we can put it under. So if we have a parking lot that is just going to remain a parking lot, then that would be an option to put this vault under.
Yeah, and ideally, we'd want to be able to have it be readily accessible, and not underneath a building. There is similar type of stormwater detention vaults that are actually being installed right now for another justice facility, actually up in the city of Linwood, where they're incorporating similar type of stormwater vaults within and underneath the parking structure that's associated with a jail and a police facility. So it's not out of the question, but putting it actually underneath the building, which means that it has to go even lower to be able to get out of the way of foundations, as well as there's risk for ongoing maintenance. Finding it and locating it in a place where it doesn't have a structure or at least an occupied building over the top is a more ideal situation. So we'll continue to kind of evaluate and have discussions about what that means and where we can end up making that work.
And then just, Bill, I added this line item at the bottom just for discussion of the preferred site. And we've got cost models for the 2 alternate sites being worked out. But at this point, it's how much do we continue exploring, the septic field site, if really we can't even imagine building a jail that had this, on-site facility.
Right. So that's kind of the utilities and the site infrastructure discussions that we've kind of evaluated for the 3 sites. We'd like to kind of go and kind of show you where we've gone with the development of those 3 options. This preferred concept discussion, that's going to move. I think we should have that after we share the preliminary cost models, because obviously cost has to be a key component within these overall discussions. But we can, and then so we'll probably defer that discussion until after we talk through cost models, and then we can really have open dialogue and discussion as a whole with regard to this. Again, from the operations standpoint, that whether it's alternate site 1 or 2, or even existing site with regard to a phased replacement, pretty much all 3 of those, based off discussions that we had with Chief, was that from an operations standpoint, manpower standpoint, those are almost going to be exactly identical to each other. We do have some, and we need to kind of do some additional work on the alternative with regard to adding on to the existing jail, which might add some additional staffing beyond those other 3 alternatives. But we need to kind of get into that a little bit more, and that could actually be, a fallout discussion from today's discussions on site options. But essentially, that's what we wanted to be able to kind of talk about today. And so with that, why wanted to kind of get back into talking about the sites a little bit more and the site development a little bit more. And so what we started actually doing a little bit more, as you can kind of see with this graphic here on the left, is really starting to kind of lay out some different options on the greenfield sites with regard to the size of the different parking lots, access, loop roads, as well as loading dock, pedestrian, and vehicular access in and around the site. Which in the last meetings we have incorporated some of those comments and kind of made some indications, but essentially we wanted to kind of get that a little bit more detail here. So what we wanted to be able to kind of show, this is essentially kind of the stormwater detention pond that we'd have to have for a greenfield site. We had some discussions with KPFF, who essentially indicated, based off of what they kind of expect for water infiltration and the size of the facility and impervious area on the site, roughly we need to be able to have a stormwater detention and infiltration pond or structure of roughly this size. And Brian, was it 130 by?
Yeah, this was 130 by 130 was this total size they gave us, and I think I just took that area and just changed it a little bit.
Yeah, into a direction. So it's a fairly large stormwater component that needs to be incorporated onto any greenfield site, and obviously something similar in this volume of stormwater detention would need to get converted into that 40,000 gallon stormwater vault in a downtown solution. And then with that, essentially, depending on the site, these would just be rotated or mirrored to be able to accommodate. But essentially, we have our public access coming in and public parking on one side, staff parking on the opposite, staff entry points, public and entry points into the building, whether it's into the lobby or with regard to visiting. We have most of the infrastructure located on one end off of a Sallyport, or sorry, a service entrance that we've incorporated, which would be a loading dock. So we have a hammerhead driveway that's been incorporated, so semis or large vehicles would be able to come and then back in to be able to unload, and then from there be able to take it directly into, whether it's laundry, into facilities and maintenance, or directly into food service, which is primarily where most of those large bulk deliveries are actually going to be coming into. And then on the opposite side, which is we have our vehicle Sallyport, which we have, again, drive-through for drop-off. We also incorporate a loop road. And then off of those, we have off of the vehicle Sallyport direct access into the medical and mental health crisis unit, which we have located right here, or into intake unit, or through the release component, which is located right in here. So everything is directly off of that for efficiency of operations. So that's, again, graphically how the entire building is and the site would be flowing and functioning. Ultimately, we've kind of refined a couple of things with regard to just how the plan is laid out with regard to individual spaces. One thing that we really started to look at is based off some discussions that we had with the chief, was with regard to how housing ends up laying out and trying to make that more and more efficient. Ultimately, what came of our discussions was really incorporating the radial plan that we have, that we've been studying recently, which would be here having 8 units all around a radial plan, and then having small, which are these little rectangles here, would be more of an outdoor rec, so they can actually have and organize our more higher custody beds around that, and then being able to service them directly off of that. So there's really no transport, no movement from housing directly into outdoor rec. So that makes for a big efficiency with regard to staffing and movement, as well as a higher level of security for the facility. Essentially the housing block, which is everything here in purple, has a sally port or sally vestibule off of the main circulation hallway. So we have one at this location and this location. So essentially we have direct movement in and through the housing area, but it's very secure. And then what we started to incorporate as well is pulling out some different housing blocks out of the array for their lower custody that would be more with maybe managed with a staff rover versus being direct supervision out of central control, which is at the center of that housing array, but still having everything in support of it, which would be, blocks to showers to be able to support each one of the units, housing organized, whether it's in cells or dormitory configurations, to be able to meet the bed count targets that we've already kind of hit on and kind of talked about previously. So that was really the biggest modification, or a major modification that we had, was really in how housing is organized and thought about, which was really focused on operations, security, and efficiency. Was mainly what that was really kind of focused on. Brian, is there anything else that you want to kind of point to with regard to the rest of the plan?
Yeah, so when we looked at it kind of from the site layout, and we kind of had it as blocked per department, but when you kind of zoom in and then you see how the actual rooms connect together, obviously it's not going to be in that block format. And so here you see kind of how we moved over some rooms and departments. For example, I think this inmate programs block right there kind of shifted entirely down, even though we wanted a direct connection between the cafeteria and the staff cafeteria and the kitchen. So originally we wanted it, kind of right next to each other, but because of the way that is, laid out, they're still gonna have to go down the hallway to get to the multipurpose room or the staff cafeteria.
Right.
So things like that. And then if we go kind of to the front lobby, the vestibule area, the bottom right.
You're right here.
Yeah. And so you would kind of think about how a visitor comes in, how they would interact through the entrance, through the lobby, the receptionist, and then where they would be going to, whether it's non-contact visit or the visiting alcoves, which kind of they're all just going to be out in this front area. And then if you're an attorney or have the contact visit interview rooms, which is further down, then you've got, I created this kind of C-shaped hallway along the back, this loop, so that inmates and visitors aren't crossing paths.
Okay. And then, any attorneys would be able to kind of come back and then be able to access the video courtrooms to be able to support the client and be in interaction with them. So,
other than that, trying to get the appropriate offices along the perimeter of the jail admin side, and then all the support. So at the back, we've got that requested entry. So the staff entry vestibule, which kind of comes directly into where the locker rooms are, and then the correction staff offices. And so that's all kind of connected. It's all jail admin and staff support are now kind of mixed in this one entire department, just kind of grouped separately so that they have better access to the jail proper than the staff on the right. And then rooms that were going to be used by multiple groupings, I put those along that main corridor. So the staff break room, alternates classroom, the large multipurpose room, those are all along that corridor so that multiple groups can come in from different locations rather than creating that direct adjacencies, which would be preferred, but and so there are direct adjacencies here, just if there are any other groups that need to come in from other places, this main corridor would be a good place to do that. And then the work release and the inmate worker dormitories. So those are still just showing just individual, the bed areas, but they will be laid out a little differently into kind of single units. So currently I just kind of showed the blocks of the sizes and the circulation. Yeah.
Yep.
But generally you would have your dorms along one side and then the offices and the alternatives officers along kind of one side, preferably with windows. And then intake and release. Yeah, we have the 2 corridor setup where you have intake and booking kind of on one side and then release on the other. And then your property and your kind of booking counter is centralized within the middle, kind of shared functions. And similar with the medical unit, I got all the cells along one side and then the exam rooms and supervising offices on the left.
So again, all these are kind of set up. As you can tell, there's a lot of corridors, but allows for that ease of operations as well as efficiency and safety. So with essentially there's an intake path where everyone's coming up this left-hand side, release path where everyone's going out of the facility through the right-hand path. There's no cross-contamination, which eliminates any issues with regard to security or transfer of contraband or having any issues kind of occur. And then obviously here, just really efficient path for a circulation loop within the medical clinic area. So it's very easy for nurses as well as for detention staff to be able to do, bed checks and observation checks of everybody that's actually within the medical unit.
I think that's about it. We still need to go in really room by room to delve down into the details and with Chief Anson and see what program spaces really need to be next to each other, how the function of the staff and how they have inmates transporting back and forth and how they actually use the space. And that'll affect a little more of how we lay out the program and massage it a little more. But this was really just the draft concept floor plan where you take all these blocks on the left and then you turn them into the actual spaces.
So then looking at the existing site, essentially what we have here is, it's a new building, replacing the existing building, which is just dashed in here. So essentially, how can we do that phasing? We kind of graphically showed this at the last meeting. So again, this is still incorporating these revisions to really how housing is organized and configured. but incorporating them here onto the site. As you can see, the blue line is essentially the lot lines that we have to stay within. The gray dashed line on this is what the existing facility that would be demolished and then built over in phase 2. In this plan here is the blue dashed outline is of the existing building that would be preserved and renovated, and then starting to really look at how the new facility could kind of link in and kind of connect to the existing building. So again, this is fairly similar to what we kind of talked about, incorporating a lot of those other revisions that we did on a greenfield site into here. So like I said, housing has been modified to be a similar configuration as in the greenfield site, Sally vestibule to be able to exit out of the housing area. And then this would be actually into the alternative housing and the dorms. So there'd be a kind of a connection and a link there. And then another Sally vestibule here to be able to link out to the main circulation corridor. What we had talked about at the last meeting is really the priorities of what spaces need to be where. And so booking and medical need to be part of phase 1 to be able to make sure that this is a fully functioning and operating facility. With this plan, we still are looking at using the area just to the east side of the district courthouse as being used as both that connection to the courthouse, but also as the vehicle sally port for access and delivery of all in custodies to the facility. So then being able to still have that inbound intake and then outbound release corridor, still having a loop corridor as well as an access point here out to the Sally port for the medical component. And then all of the building support and inmate support functions are all clustered here at the center of the building, which also would all be part of phase 1. So we have our kitchen component, which has all of our coolers and freezers, our storage, wash area. What we've been able to kind of incorporate into here would be a loading dock directly off of the street. So we'd be able to have large vehicles backing in and essentially from this location be able to have direct access into the kitchen area, into laundry, and into maintenance. So again, we have some real efficiencies with regard to the bulk deliveries, coming into the facility. We still are kind of working through and massaging really access and movement in and around all of those, but it's starting to come together pretty well. And then here in the phase 2, this is where things get, again, a little bit unique.
And I like to point out, Bill, too, that on both options here, whether or not we demolish the existing building or reuse it, phase 1 is essentially going to be the same for both, because we're still going to need to move over and have a functional jail after phase 1.
So the biggest difference actually between these two is in this option, we end up creating a new alternatives housing dormitories. In this option, we end up converting or reusing, in a sense, the existing housing units of the old jail and repurpose them and modify them to be for our alternative housing. So at least we're able to kind of reuse some of that infrastructure, but being able to kind of work around, as you can see, this fairly a unique shape of a building, and there ends up being a lot of kind of white space, which is going to be void space or circulation space, is really where it starts to become a little bit more difficult to be able to make those connections and make them in a very efficient way. Is kind of that next step that we'd have to continue to kind of work through on this alternative. And then, as you can see, we actually do have quite a bit of space. So how we position these blocks in the site, we do have some flexibility to, slide the building further to the north if we want to have a tight connection to the historic courthouse, or place it a little bit further away and creating more of a linkage to that, and creating more of a buffer and a space away. Again, this might be some opportunities where, no matter where or how we end up kind of sliding and moving that around, to be able to develop and find locations for the 40,000 cubic foot detention vault. So there are definitely some opportunities with how we end up ultimately wanting to kind of position this. But those were kind of the main things that we were kind of studying and looking at based off of our conversation a couple of weeks ago, as well as part of the staffing plan that we talked with the chief about. And ultimately, we need to kind of revisit this a little bit on the operations side to see if, based off the layout, the flow, and the function, if the staffing plan that we're applying to the other three options would still be able to work in this configuration, or if there's going to be a need for some additional staff during certain shifts. So any kind of questions with regard to the plan alternatives, or how they would be kind of deployed on the existing site? Okay. So with that, we wanted to be able to kind of roll into and talk about cost options. Oops, let me get to here. So JMB Consulting Group is our cost consultant. They have prepared this preliminary rough order of magnitude cost analysis based off the information that we have at hand. There's still multiple kind of questions that we still need to kind of answer and refine. But these are really based off of the information that we have on hand, the square footage, the different systems, the size of the systems, as well as all the offsite utilities that we had as of last week. Some of that, as Brian's kind of presented, has been constantly evolving, including really the distance that we actually have to some of the utility connections at site 1. But some of the assumptions that we made with regard to all of these, so we need to know what's the square footage, what's the size of the facility to be able to do a cost model. Second, we need to know when. So we had to be able to pick a date and time to pin the construction costs to. And so we made an assumption of a start date of April 2024. So this would be in the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter of 2024, just to be able to apply a certain amount of contingency and construction cost escalation. So we'd be dealing with at least some level of numbers of reality. We also need to be able to understand project delivery method. And so this would be, is this going to be a design bid build, which would be a hard bid, which essentially you go through full design documentation to 100% permit and bidding documents. And then you bid those documents out to general contractors and subcontractors that are interested in winning the work. On bid day is essentially when the marketplace indicates the value of your project. You select the apparent low bidder and you're able to move the project forward. Another alternative would be to use a GCCM, CMGC, CM at risk type of delivery model, which is where you bring on a general contractor during the design process to help with cost analysis, constructability, and evaluating the design. With this model, this allows you to actually shorten the design duration as well as overlap the construction and design process. So it reduces some of the general conditions that ultimately you would have because the contractor would be establishing a guaranteed maximum price at the end of design or at different portions in design. You can also release multiple bid packages, which is, again, why you're able to overlap the design and construction process, as well as to reduce the time you need to design, because you're starting construction while the project is still being finalized design, which is what this assumption was based off of, was as a CMGC model. And then we're assuming, again, prevailing wage with regard to construction cost and labor costs associated with the project. And that would be applied to all of these. We are making some assumptions with regard to exclusions, that hazardous materials handling is disposal is precluded from the project. So again, based off of the existing sites that were being considered, we don't anticipate a huge amount of hazardous materials, but there might be some, especially at site 2. And then again, there might be some hazardous materials abatement and lead-based paint abatement that might need to occur at the existing facility. But that's not captured in here since we don't have any information to be able to try to quantify any of those values. We also are just anticipating standard 5-day-a-week construction schedules, not multiple shift work, and overtime hours with regard to construction, while with the CMGC, we are able to overall shorten the overall duration of the project, but that is not due to shift work or longer hours of work. It's just more efficiency in how the design and construction processes start to overlap. So then getting into that, what we end up having is site option 1, site option 2, the existing site with a new building. So we'd be demolishing the old building and doing a 2-phase construction. And then the existing site with a renovation of the existing building and addition of the new building. As indicated with the floor plans that we just showed, it's not as efficient with regard to layout. So there's actually some additional square footage that we anticipate, especially with trying to connect to the existing building. So the enclosed area increases slightly. And the way that and again, looking at the start date of April of 2024, just as so we have built-in construction escalation into these numbers. The way that you're kind of looking at this is based off of times 1,000. So this is 52.9 million. Site 2, 52.9 million, which is essentially we're placing the same building on the same site. And then on two different sites, the existing building, due to some efficiencies with regard to how it's laid out and some utility connections and infrastructure connections, even though it's multi-phased, the existing site with the new building put on is slightly less at 51.5 million. And then the existing renovation and addition component still needing to be done in multiple phases while occupied, actually extends out the duration of construction, which has some costs, not to mention the enclosed area with efficiency of layout and connection increases costs as well. Again, all of these are based off of the same level of quality. They anticipate similar type of systems, whether it's building enclosure, roofing, mechanical, electrical, security systems. They would be similar and in line with the level of quality of systems and materials that you saw when you toured and looked at other similar facilities in the area, like the SCORE jail and the Skagit jail up and down the I-5 corridor. What we end up having here, this is the project costs. So this then takes the construction costs and then applies all those other elements and costs that the county would have above and beyond the bricks and mortar construction costs, which is in this column. That would be any design services fees. This would include any owner's fees, which would be like geotechnical, hazardous materials, testing, third-party commissioning, all those type of consultants directly to the owner would be incorporated in that. Any development and permit fees would also be incorporated into this. Any of your TAP fees and development fees that would be required, or offsite mitigation fees for traffic or anything like that, if that would be required by the county or by the city. It also incorporates any infrastructure that is off-site. So essentially this number is everything on-site. So this is utilities, stormwater detention, and once all those utilities come onto site, anything off of the site or outside the perimeter, so that would be that, roughly half mile, or actually it's about a mile, extension of utilities for site number 1, of both water as well as sewer to the site. Anything with regard to really the leach septic system, or for water tower for site 2, would also be incorporated into those project costs. So that's really where a lot of that project cost is at, or is incorporated into that project cost, is really those offsite utilities and the infrastructure development costs are incorporated actually into this value here. And as you guys see, the new site, really the difference between the different septic systems and water solutions, these are fairly close in cost to each other. And actually, I think we need to reevaluate the distance of and verify the cost for those offsite utilities for site number 1. I think, we think that actually when we start looking at those distances and the depths that we're kind of dealing with those utilities, this number might actually drop down. We actually think there's some conservative estimates in those offsite utilities there. And then we have, with the existing building, all those utilities are right there. We really are not having to do anything offsite. We're just tapping into the infrastructure that the city and the county has already built into the blocks surrounding the existing site. And And so that's kind of paints a picture there of where we're kind of standing. So these would be holistic costs. These do also have, in addition to the escalation costs built into these for getting out essentially, 3 years from now. They also have design contingencies. So as the design gets more and more refined and documented, there's a potential that those costs can come down based off design decisions that are made down the road. They also do carry and incorporate into this project cost any owner contingency, which is a percentage that the owner, no matter what the delivery model would be able to hold on to be able to pay for any contract changes, unforeseen conditions on developing of the site, or anything along those lines, or enhancements that the county would like to be able to incorporate during the construction process. So there is a owner's contingency that's incorporated into these values as well. And we had to kind of look at these at a fairly kind of high level, and it's more of a comparative of all these different options is really what these cost models are really indicating. As we go hopefully to a next step of a preferred option, we can really focus our energy and our time and our efforts onto that preferred option and be able to quantify these values in a lot more detail. And with more detail, less contingency, less speculation. So hopefully those values will actually continue to drop as well. Speaking of escalation, John put into here really what the anticipated annual increase of construction escalation would be. So essentially, if this estimate was to be delayed or was anticipated to have the projects start on April of 2025, so add an additional year, all of these values would increase by about 4.7%. If it was to be delayed 2 years for that need, go up to 9.6, and then so on. So just be able to kind of illustrate the compound effect of escalation, both of cost of labor as well as of material. So essentially, that's what these are documenting. We have additional information that we can kind of go into if you're interested, which is based off of our assumptions of really material takeoff and unit cost of different systems for the different sites. Again, we're kind of looking at really utilities. We also then look at materiality. So we can kind of get into that in more detail if you are interested. We will provide this to you following this meeting, so you can kind of delve into that in even more detail if you are interested. So again, with that, I want to kind of more turn it over to an ongoing and kind of open conversation with regard to both the sites, the offsite development costs, site locations, site solutions, operations, and actual construction costs, at least at this level, and see where everybody's thoughts are at.
Do I have anybody who would like to ask some questions to start with? Let's see any hands up. Commissioner Schutte, you just unmuted. What are you thinking?
Yeah, obviously a lot to digest there in terms of options and cost and all that kind of stuff. Maybe curious to hear from Chief Hansen about what what they're thinking. I know you mentioned that you had met recently, and just kind of would like to hear them weigh in on some of this, simply because they gotta manage it. The responsibility is ours to build and maintain, and they got to operate it. So definitely interested in hearing some of that feedback as well.
Chief Hansen, would you like to jump in now?
Yeah, sure. We spent a couple hours earlier last week with CAMB talking about operations and about how this thing's going to be, if we build it or when we build it, how it's laid out. And I made some suggestions on how we could be more efficient and better utilize staff. And as a result of that, you saw today what the changes that they incorporated since our last meeting. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm encouraged by it. I think it's a good plan. I think that it's going to be, well, it's going to be as efficient as I could make one. So I don't know. I guess that's my feedback.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to discuss or comment now?
A lot of numbers, a lot of options. Might be a good idea to bring in Public Works, bring in Loretta, if that's one of the sites that we're looking at, also just so that we can get their input.
Okay. We can make sure that they are invited for the next meeting. Other questions or comments? Bill, I don't see any on.
Hey, Frank, would you think it'd be beneficial, rather than kind of waiting for the next meeting with courts, to schedule just a separate where we can kind of meet and bring them up to speed? So essentially kind of replicate the presentation today, at least of the site and of the different space configurations, so they can at least weigh in on court operations, video court, access to the sites, that type of thing?
Absolutely. I think that might be a good option. The other piece that I would like to see is what is the staffing change to the existing corrections department that's required for each of these different proposals.
Right. And like I indicated, we had good meetings with Chief Hansen, kind of working through that. We just need to kind of finalize that and get it to a level where we can actually convey what those changes are. There is going to be an increase in staffing, and that would be applied to any of these solutions. There will be an increase, but I think based off of those discussions about trying to make things as efficient as possible, it was a fairly minimal overall amount of staffing stations that would need to be added to be able to meet this increase size of a facility, but also increase capacity to support the community. So that was very positive. We just need to be able to finalize the documentation so you can actually see and quantify that. We do have operational cost data, so we will actually be applying that. So you will actually be able to see annual cost effect by adding those different staff positions, and really kind of hope to be able to have that to you probably within the next 5 days or so.
Okay. When you say costing models, would that include things like the day we open the new jail, the jail is going to only increase from 85 inmates to 120? the staffing required for that level of inmate population, and then have watershed changes when the staffing level or the inmate population goes to 190, 210, 240, or whatever the numbers work out to be, what those staffing level changes would be, because I wouldn't expect the staffing level change to just be linear.
No, it's definitely not linear. It is much more of a curve. And because of that, you actually would be most likely be bringing staff on a little bit quicker than being able to stay above in front of the amount of occupancy and bed count need within there. And again, that I think part of that is going to be that discussion that we kind of had a little bit the last time, which is if there is a need for the state or other counties or other agencies to be able to rent beds, that essentially those daily bed rates don't really pay for your capital costs. But what they do pay for and offset is your operations and your staffing costs. And so by having a couple of contracted beds, that would actually help to be able to cover, any increase in staffing that you end up might having, while those staff are primarily going to be for all of your inmates within your county and your jurisdiction. But those contracted bed rate payments end up really covering that difference, as really our experience and really how those bed rates end up kind of working from an overall kind of operational cost standpoint. But yeah, the model initially is going to be looking at overall staffing at full build out, or essentially at full operations. Once we get that done, we'll probably want to be able to and confirm that. We'll have another phone call with Chief Hansen to kind of evaluate those numbers and values, confirm the information, the data is correct and in line with our conversations, and then be able to say, yeah, is there a incremental step as we go from 86 operational capacity to 110 to 160 to 200, as that kind of increases. Is there a tipping point where any of that potentially could occur?
Correct. Good. Thank you. But your idea of having a meeting with the judges to talk about through the same things and get their input in regards to the court's operational necessities would be very helpful.
Will do. So, Frank, if you can kind of arrange that, or just make the kind of introductions in who you want us to kind of coordinate with, then we can kind of take it from there.
Yep, I'll set up the initial meeting and then see what would work as far as the timeline is concerned. The time is concerned.
Okay.
So as for myself, of course, I'm always cautious of the time we spend on these things, the expenditure of our resources, and even our interest based upon, of course, what we could actually afford to pay, because we have a limited ability to do that. Now, I reached out to Frank to ask him about the different numbers that you were talking about earlier from private investment. I'm very interested to find out what those are. But at this point, he says he doesn't have any numbers, just an invite to meet with those folks. But of course, those numbers are going to be the thing we have to base our interest in. I want a lot of things, but if I can't afford to pay for it and there is no money or pocket to pay for it out of, then it's a waste of time and effort, to be honest with you. So the question is if these folks have that much better of an investment opportunity, I sure can't wait to hear it, because it could surely change how much we'll be able to invest. I don't see any scenario, even if you basically give us the money for nothing, where we can afford 80 million. But we'll see what happens. So please, when you get those numbers, share them with us.
Yeah, we'll do. Again, I think, with regard to those conversations, that interaction has to kind of occur with between the county and PFIC, who is the agency that we've kind of made those connections kind of with. And we want to make sure that we kind of facilitate those discussions. And then, make sure that whatever information is kind of discussed in those meetings gets passed through to the commissioners.
Anybody else have any other comments or questions?
Commissioner, what I will do is contact PFIC and maybe have them come in for next Monday's briefing, or at the latest, the following Monday's briefing, to update the commission on their input into this conversation.
Okay, and I just appreciate a simple question also. When you're talking to them, what do they look like historically in the last year for interest rates?
Sure.
Will do.
So what else we got, guys?
That's kind of where we had. So again, our preference and kind of the anticipated next step would be based off of all this information to be able to say that, yeah, this is a preferred option that we would like to continue to evaluate, get more detail in, both from a cost estimate and analysis as well as operational analysis, and design to be able to narrow that all down. So that's a decision point that we need to be able to make. My feeling is we're not at a point where we can make obviously that decision at all. But hopefully once we kind of have some conversations with, what the potential opportunities are for tax exempt financing versus doing a public financing, as well as looking at operational costs, then maybe at that point we'll be able to make a decision of saying, well, yeah, definitely these options are definitely out and we want to focus on these others. Just looking at obviously at the numbers, just from a cost standpoint, there is with the existing site with a new building, a phased building, is actually looking to be probably the most cost effective. It's obviously has the closest connection to the courts for inmate transport and movement. It is closest to services with regard to already being downtown. It's on an existing site that already has a jail on it. So as far as development and changes of use, could be the most straightforward, as long as the operational costs are as efficient and can still work based off of the efficiencies you get from a new site. So that's, again, kind of our initial take on this, and it's mainly, and that's really taking into account both operational efficiency, design solution, location, transport, as well as construction and project costs. But as the commissioner indicated, if you can't afford anything or something, any of these options, there needs to be possibly a discussion that goes along with that.
And just for everybody, I'm sure everybody does their own math. They also know this, but even if at 82 million, if we were to give them this money for free with no interest over a 30-year period, we'd have to pay 2.73 million each year for debt payment. If we were only able to get 20 years at 0% interest, we're looking at 4.1 million a year in payment to pay it off. We're currently, we discussed, and I'm sure Frank shared the numbers with you that I put together that he agrees are accurate. Unless we find other revenue sources, none of that's even possible. Okay, any other questions or comments on that? Then do you have more that you'd like to bring forward, Bill, in regards to the meeting itself? Or you want to talk about next steps, next meeting, or you?
That's all we have right now. So again, the next meeting is currently scheduled about a month out, which then, and why that was kind of scheduled was to be able to give us plenty of time to refine any outcomes with regard to a preferred option, be able to go and do more detailed cost analysis and everything else. We can continue to hold that meeting date. And that agenda just might change. Next steps are obviously to have discussions with regard to tax exempt financing, which would not be necessarily initially with this entire group, but hopefully would be at least with Frank and possibly maybe one of the other commissioners that would like to be able to sit in and listen in on that. We'll be briefing and sharing information with the courts to be able to get their input as well as to bring them up to speed. And then we'll be finalizing and confirming operational cost and staffing costs and plan for the solutions. So those are kind of the next steps that would all be kind of occurring in between today and the next anticipated meeting, which would be July the 19th.
Okay. All right, then with that, if there's no further comments or questions, commissioners, I will entertain a motion.
Chair, move we adjourn.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. Ladies and gentlemen, hearing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.